Death at the Montana State Prison is not an uncommon thing in a confrontational situation, but it is a lot less common than it would be by allowing certain individuals to have contact with other inmates and staff at the Montana State Prison. The prison riot that occurred at the Montana State Prison was led by people who are now facing the death penalty and were facing the death penalty at the time of the riot. So therefore, I think that there are times in our society when, just like war is necessary to stop the advance of the Third Reich throughout the world, you have to have the ability to exercise the death penalty to stop certain individuals from preying on others.
Thank you. Pat.
Good evening. There are many reasons to be against capital punishment and the death penalty. You can be against it because it doesn't work. You can be against it because it doesn't do any of the things that the proponents of it claim it does. You can be against it because it falls disproportionately on the poor, the unpopular, the minority. And there are very compelling arguments on all those bases. I won't be making any of those arguments. Scott will be, because he understands them better than I do, and he can explain them better than I can. But what I will be arguing to you is that the death penalty is unnecessary killing. And it harms the society that does it. So it's unnecessary, and it harms the society that does it. Why is it unnecessary? Because viable alternatives exist. We know about them. They're practicable. We can do them. It's simply a matter of making up our minds to do it. What's the viable alternative? Life without parole. Do we have this anywhere in the world? Absolutely. Where? In America, in the federal system. I've prosecuted people for murders. I've prosecuted people for multiple murders. They're doing life without parole. They're not going to get out and kill anybody else. So this argument that we have to kill them to keep them from killing somebody else is a false argument. As to the point that was just made about, well, we have to do this, we have to kill them because if we keep them in jail, they'll kill somebody else. A couple things about that. First of all, I think it's a false issue. Firstly, because I would just point out that it is a rather pathetic statement of helplessness to claim that we cannot construct a penal system that won't keep extremely dangerous people from killing each other. As a matter of fact, in the federal system, we have that. For instance, a gentleman that I put in jail for life without parole and who will die in his little cell does not, by the way, have to spend any time with other prisoners all day. The Constitution does not require that. Yes, he gets exercise. He has no contact with any other prisoners at all, ever, period. That's practical. It takes a little money. We have to spend a little money, sure. It's cheaper to kill people. We'll talk about that later. I can't beat that argument. Yeah, we can kill them, it's cheap, but it's not right. So this argument that we have to kill them to keep them from killing other people is simply false. Secondly, and much more profoundly disturbing about that argument, I have to say, it's quite disturbing to me. Think about what you're saying. You're going to kill somebody, not for what they have done, not for what they have been found guilty of in a court of law, not for what they were accused of, tried, proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You're going to kill them for what they may do someday in the future. Think about it. They haven't done it yet. That's why we're going to kill them. To keep them from doing something in the future, maybe. Now, how do we know? How do we know? How do we know they're not going to be Duncan McKenzie? 20 years. Heinous crime. Pretty heinous. More heinous than the fellow you described. Terrible crime he did. 20 years, Duncan McKenzie hasn't killed anybody in prison. Duncan McKenzie used to sweep the snow out from in front of the prison. Duncan McKenzie didn't kill anybody else. How do you know? Do you look deep in their eyes? Do you ask the cops who arrested them? Point is, you don't know. We don't allow punishment for anybody in this society without due process. The idea that we would allow the ultimate punishment, murder, we would kill them for something they haven't done yet, it's truly disturbing. And I can't really understand that. Maybe someone can explain that tonight. Viable alternatives. Viable alternatives exist. Let me tell you, I start out with a prejudice here. My prejudice is this. I have a premise. My premise is that the unnecessary taking of life is a bad thing. Okay? Now, anybody wants to debate that, we can talk about it. But that's my premise. So therefore, if the death penalty is unnecessary, the unnecessary killing of people, I think it's a bad thing. We don't need it. We have life without parole. It protects society. It acts as an extreme deterrent. Anybody who's not deterred by the idea of spending the rest of their life in a small box by themselves is not going to be deterred by anything, my friends. That's not going to happen. Also, secondly, it damages society. How does it damage society? How does it damage society that we kill people in our name? Because it forces society to be intellectually dishonest and shallow, and it forces society to be morally dishonest. It forces us as a society to lie. It forces us as a society to be stupid and to pretend we are more stupid than we are. Why? Well, why do we have to pretend we're stupid? Why do we have to be morally dishonest if we have capital punishment? Because it's the only way to defend it. You can't defend it honestly intellectually. You can't defend it honestly morally. I'll tell you why. You can't defend it intellectually honestly because you don't need it. You can meet every proper goal of punishment without killing people. You can protect society, you can have retribution, you can protect even the other prisoners. You can do all that and you don't have to kill them. You don't. That's fact. That's fact. So you don't have to do it. So the only way you can say it's necessary is to pretend that things aren't the way they are. Pretend that it's impossible to figure out a way to keep these guys from killing each other. Pretend that we can figure out who's going to kill in the future and who's not. Pretend. You have to be intellectually dishonest. Deterrence, the judge has already said, doesn't believe in deterrence. You know what? Neither does anybody else who has anything to do with the death penalty. It doesn't work. Everybody knows it doesn't work. There's never been a scintilla of evidence that the death penalty ever deterred anybody. So that's out there. More importantly is the fact that we do know what deters. What deters is swift, sure, and effective law enforcement. The reason people commit crimes is not because they have done a cost-benefit analysis, folks, and said, gee, if I get caught, I don't mind getting the death penalty. Or I don't mind getting life in prison. What they think is, I'm not going to get caught. I've defended criminals too, and that's how they think. I never met a guy who said, well, I knew I was going to get caught, but I thought I could do the time. I thought it was worth it. No, that isn't how criminals think, people. You change the equation. Change the equation. Make them realize they will get caught. Make them realize they will be convicted. Now you've deterred a crime. But simply adding more and more years and things onto, I talk too much as my students know. Adding more years on doesn't do any good because it doesn't deter. There's no need for specific deterrence. As I've already pointed out, we have life without parole. Retribution, already described that. Why is it morally dishonest? It's morally dishonest because it's hypocritical. You can't justify it without being hypocritical. How is it hypocritical? Call it what you will. When you kill somebody under capital punishment, you're killing them because you, as a society, have a need to kill them. You think it's either cheaper or it serves some deep psychological need of yours for revenge and vengeance. We need it. We need to kill them so that we feel that justice has been done. We need it to deter crime. Well, we don't. So think about it for a minute. We kill people because we need to. We have a need to kill them. We feel justified in it. Ask yourself this. Was there ever a murderer, a real murderer, who didn't kill for that very same reason? They kill for money. They kill for vengeance. They kill to get even. They kill because they hate someone. That's why they kill. We should have a different morality. We can't while we have capital punishment. Therefore, you have to be hypocritical to try and morally justify it. You can't. There you go. We can talk about this later if anybody doesn't absolutely agree with every single one.
Matt, well, I feel somewhat outclassed here. I'm not an attorney, and I've never been to law school, and I'm merely a citizen legislator. I paid my $15, and I got involved in the process, and I wound up in Helena, and here I am tonight as somewhat of a proponent for the death penalty. And I guess I'd have to say that I look at this from a layman's position, from the citizen's point of view, and basically as a legislator, what I hear from my constituency, and you're going to hear some very eloquent discussion from these other fine gentlemen. And so I'll try and present what I see as a common viewpoint towards the basic reason why we should have a death penalty for extreme circumstances. I start off by saying, what is the law? According to Bastier, the law is the organization of the natural right of lawful defense is the substitution of a common force for individual forces. And this common force is to do only what the individual forces have a natural and lawful right to do, to protect persons, liberties, and properties, to maintain the right of each, and to cause justice to reign over us all. Well, how well does our law measure up to this? I don't think it's doing a real good job, at least if you see what the media is feeding the public day after day after day. And where does the law seem to be failing us? As the public perceives it through the media, and whether statistics bear it out or not, they see a continual flow through the media of stories of repeat violent offenders who are being put back on the streets. You see stories of multiple murders, drugs and guns, kids and guns, kids and drugs, you name it. And it's a constant pounding of the electorate. And whether the statistics bear it out or not, once the people believe this, it becomes a truth. It becomes a political truth. It becomes something that the people want done. And consequently, when you're sitting over there with the red and the green light in the State House, people will phone in their messages and tell you to vote this way, vote that way, and they're going to ask you to vote as they perceive the problem, as it's been fed to them. Now, those of us who are middle-aged or older remember a time before the more liberal and progressive policies of today, and we remember a time when people felt safe walking home at night, and when kids could go down to a playground and their parents didn't have to worry about their safety. We also remember the death penalty. The electric chair, the gallows, and the gas chamber, they were all active symbols of what could happen if you followed the wrong path in life. Now, I happen to have been raised in Ohio, around Columbus, Ohio. And that's where the Ohio State Penitentiary is. And I can remember in the 1950s, when I was 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, reading the newspaper, the electrocutions that went on at the state penitentiary. And they have stuck with me to this very day. That was something that I did not want to happen to me. A strange thing would pass. I ran into a gentleman a while back when I was on the campaign trail, and he too was from that area of Ohio and about my age. And we got discussing this. And he said to me, "Do you remember the headlines in the Columbus Dispatch when they electrocuted the prisoners at the state penitentiary?" And I said, "I certainly do. I've never been able to forget that." Well, it stuck with him as well. I carry these memories with me today, and they do influence my behavior. And it's very difficult to tell how many hands have been stayed by the deterrent effect of seeing somebody else be prosecuted to the full extent of the law and pay the ultimate price, their own life, the deeds that they've committed. And I just wonder if my memories would be the same, if my behavior would be the same, if I was to read, to have read, and have the memories of reading about dinner at the Red Lobster. I don't think so. As citizens, we look to the law to help protect our loved ones. And unfortunately, all law enforcement only occurs after law is broken. It's after the fact. If any preventive measures to be gained by law enforcement, if there is to be any kind of deterrent factor, it can only come from those of us who watch what happens to the perpetrator of a heinous crime. As distasteful as the death penalty may be, it has been an essential part of our law for the course of 200 years. And you've heard the reasons that Judge McLean has passed the death sentence on prisoners. And I believe that the public is going to push for the death penalty more and more, as each and every one of us is touched by a violent crime. I know that for years I went through life and I didn't know anybody who'd ever been hurt or affected by a violent crime until last year, about this time. Actually, it was around Christmas time. A friend of mine called me and told me that a very good friend of mine had been murdered in Mississippi while she was visiting her mother's house. And as the rate of violent crime increases, as more and more people are touched throughout our society where somebody that they know, they love, is affected by violent criminal behavior, these people, as electorate, are going to push for more severe penalties. That's a fact. Thank you.
Yo, Matt, Scott.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today. I am not an attorney either. ACLU is a mixture of attorneys and regular taxpayers and citizens who are concerned about defending the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I've had the privilege and honor to be able to serve as the executive director for ACLU for the last 7 years. And with the advent of the McKinsey scheduled execution, it's the second such case that I've dealt with during my tenure in this position. I hope to reflect personally during questions and answers, and I'm looking forward to your personal reflections at the same time. So for the opening, I'll just present to you as best I can a brief summary of ACLU's position to clarify our organization's views on why capital punishment should be opposed on moral, political, and of course constitutional grounds. First of all, I think it needs to be said that capital punishment is a relic of the earliest days of penology, when slavery, branding, and other forms of corporal punishment were commonplace. I don't believe, and ACLU doesn't believe, that it has any place in a civilized society. Executions are a dramatic, public spectacle of official, violent homicide, which teaches the permissibility of killing people to solve social problems. The worst possible example that we could set for society. I'm reminded of that popular song of Holly Near's of why do we kill people to show that killing, why do we kill people who kill people to show that killing is wrong? It's a foolish notion. The ACLU, like most Montanans, deplore criminal violence. We do not oppose the death penalty because we feel sorry for those who have been convicted of murder. On the contrary, we condemn in all killers their lack of respect for human life. Because we do respect human life, we reject as immoral any policy of state-authorized killing. Legal execution gives society the unmistakable message that life ceases to be sacred when it is thought to be useful to take it, that violence is legitimate when those with the legal power to kill think it is justified or pragmatic. Reliance on the death penalty obscures the true causes of crime and distracts attention from the social measures that might effectively control crime. Capital punishment is a waste of resources. It requires a disproportionate expenditure of time and energy by the courts, prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys, juries, courtroom and correctional personnel. It unduly burdens the system of criminal justice and therefore is counterproductive as an instrument to society's control of violent crime. ACLU holds that the death penalty inherently violates the constitutional bans against cruel and unusual punishment and against the deprivation of due process of law and equal protections of the law. The imposition of the death penalty is inconsistent with fundamental values of our democratic system. The argument most often cited in support for capital punishment is that it deters capital crimes more effectively than imprisonment. It's interesting to hear the judge acknowledge that that is not the case. But that position is founded on wish and not fact. Persons who commit murder or other crimes of personal violence either premeditate them or they do not. If they do not, it's impossible to imagine how any punishment could possibly deter them. The great numbers of impulsive crimes which are committed are usually done under the influence, as suggested in some of the specific cases, under the influence of drugs, alcohol, emotional stress, and where logical thinking is suspended. Impulsive violence is inflicted by persons heedless of the consequences of themselves or others. When crime is premeditated, the criminal ordinarily expects to escape detection, arrest, and conviction. If there is a possibility that the severe punishment does deter crime, then long-term imprisonment is severe enough to cause any rational person not to commit violence. Numerous significant studies concerning the death penalty in America, as well as findings of the National Resource Council, lead us to consider that when the death penalty is used, there is no decrease in the subsequent rate of criminal homicide. In fact, use of the death penalty in a state may actually increase the subsequent rate. There are several other arguments worth mentioning. I'm sure we'll get to them in Q&A. Unfairness. There has been a substantial amount of evidence to show that the courts have been arbitrary, racially biased, and unfair in the way they have sentenced some persons to prison, but others to death. The irreversibility, a large body of evidence shows that innocent people are often convicted of crimes, including capital crimes, and that some of them have been executed. The barbarity, when the government sanctions, commands, and ceremoniously carries out the execution of a prisoner, it supports the darker side of human nature. And the financial costs. It's far more expensive to go through the capital defense and lengthy appeals that anybody who is likely to take a death or have a life sacrifice would want before somebody wants to pull the switch or push the plunger or flip the trap door or pull the trigger by whatever means we're using. There are statistics that suggest that it's easily twice as expensive to execute people as opposed to put them in prison for life. And finally, the abolition trends. The people who are in the movement to oppose the death penalty are called abolitionists. It's not coincidental that the people who oppose slavery were called abolitionists. The people who propose that death penalty is still a deterrent are hanging on to an old myth about what makes society work, what deters people from certain activity. Nationally, internationally, the trend is towards abolition. And it is a sad commentary of what nations we line up with in terms of their records on human rights as allies in supporting the death penalty. So ACLU, in summary, stands in coalition with at least 50 organizations nationwide, including most of the major religious denominations in the National Coalition Against the Death Penalty. We think that capital punishment is an intolerable denial of civil liberties applied randomly at best, discriminatorily at worst. Court decisions and public sentiment notwithstanding, we shall continue to seek to prevent each execution and to abolish capital punishment. Actual experience establishes these conclusions beyond a reasonable doubt. No comparable body of evidence contradicts these conclusions. Two conclusions prevail. Capital punishment does not deter crime, and the death penalty is uncivilized in theory and unfair and inequitable in practice.
We now are at that point where we are going to permit brief rebuttals if anyone so desires to rebut anything that's been said and avoid the questions that will follow from the moderator.
Well, I'd like to rebut a few things. First of all, when Pat talks about people who support the death penalty being of a stupid nature, I'd make the following observation, that nowhere in the system of American jurisprudence in a debate over a legal matter can a person get away with calling another person's viewpoint stupid, except if you happen to have the luxury of being a law professor.
Or a judge.
No, if the judge did it, the Supreme Court would reprimand. What you have to take a look at is the rationale of both sides behind the death penalty. And you don't take the civil liberties position of saying that we're abolitionists just like the people who tried to free the slaves. There's a vast difference. You know, for me to be pro-death penalty and for someone to say that I would favor slavery, to me is not a very rational argument in persuading me to change my views. What you're looking at is a question that some may call predictability or whatever. I call it the commission of such a heinous crime that the person should never be afforded the opportunity to commit that crime again. Now, ask yourself if that's borne out. Now, Pat That says it's not. But if you take a look at the riots and the people that died in the riot at the Montana State Prison in 1991, the people who were killing those people were under the sentence of death. So predictability is foreseeable in certain cases. And when you have an aggravation mitigation hearing, as a judge, you come to learn how to predict certain types of behavior. You take a long look at the individual's past criminal history, the violent acts that they have committed upon society up until the point in time when that ultimate sanction is put upon them. And it's their past history that gives you the predictability about their future behavior. And I think that the prison riot has borne that thought out. You do not take every individual in our society who's involved in the death of another human being and sentence that person to death. I would say that less than 5%, and probably more like 3%, of people who get convicted of the offense of deliberate homicide or first-degree murder in those jurisdictions would suffer such a penalty. And the reason they suffer such a penalty is that their past history has shown that there is no way to successfully treat this individual. It quite simply cannot be done, and the ultimate sanction has to be imposed to protect other members of society. Now, you can talk about having speedy law enforcement, but none of us would suggest that we would want a member of law enforcement looking over our shoulder at all periods of the time, and that law enforcement should be more swift. Everybody is under constraints. Just as we say the federal government should balance their budget and live within their means, the same as we as individuals have to live within our families' means, so must the state. It has limited resources in which to apply, and it cannot spend all of its money to have a police officer looking over everybody's shoulder. That's just not feasible, and it's also not tolerable, because it would be infringing, that same thought would be infringing upon rights of individuals that must be protected. So it's not a question of speedier law enforcement. The people who commit the crimes are apprehended. That's why they are on death row. So I don't believe that argument carries weight. Now, whether or not capital punishment is correct, that debate is going to go on long after all of us in this room have gone to see our Maker. But however, when we as a society demand that certain penalties be imposed, I think that in a democratic society, you have to listen to the demands. And when people commit certain acts, you eliminate certain types of behavior on their part in the future. Another last thought that I'd like to throw out in response is, let's say you apprehend terrorists who have committed a bombing. And we see this in Israel quite common. They apprehend the terrorist, and 2 months later we see a kidnapping of some high official, and the threat is, we're going to kill him unless you release these political prisoners who got caught blowing up something. And by keeping those individuals alive to bomb another day, we're in essence prolonging the commission of that crime. It's my feeling that when you get someone in a terrorist act that has committed such a heinous crime, remove that bargaining chip from that terrorist allies, in that that person isn't going to be around to negotiate over in the future. He's going to be gone, or she's going to be gone when apprehended. That's all I have.
Other rebuttals?
I just was going to say I'm limiting it to 2 to 3 minutes. So.
Yes.
That wasn't
Seeing
clear.
Professor Cotter look up, she
Well, no, I don't think it was clear how much time you had for rebuttals.
Patrick?
Thank you. I actually didn't call the position stupid. As a matter of fact, my whole position is that you're not stupid, and the people who are in favor of the death penalty are not stupid. They are, in fact, intellectually dishonest. There's a huge difference. You can't be intellectually dishonest if you're stupid. If you're stupid, you just don't know. If you know and you don't face the fact, then you're intellectually dishonest. A society that believes or purports to carry out the death penalty is intellectually dishonest, not stupid. It's worse to be intellectually dishonest, in my opinion. Why? Because the facts are not as you need to make them to justify it. First of all, again, the most disturbing thing about this notion that we kill people for what they might do sometime in the future, you didn't address it, Judge. How do you get off killing a man who hasn't had a trial for a crime he hasn't committed yet? How do you do it? How do you do it? You say you're not going to kill everybody that's convicted of murder. How do you decide? In your world, I think you'd have to kill everybody, because you can't decide. You can't predict the future. If you are, then why limit it to people who've already committed a crime? Why don't we just go through society, pick out the people who, on the basis of their record, are likely to commit a crime, they're likely to murder somebody, and by God, let's kill them. Let's get the dangerously insane. Let's kill them. High probability there. Why wait? We're not killing them for what they did. We're killing them for what they're going to do. So it doesn't matter what they did. It matters what they're going to do. And if you're killing them for what they did, then by God, you got to kill them all, or else you get into the amazing Karnak sitting around figuring out who's going to be a killer someday. And that's where you get this lottery of death. You get a good lawyer, you don't die. You get a bad lawyer, you die. You get a judge who has the sight, you die. You get a judge who doesn't, you don't. That's not justice. By the way, intellectually dishonest, where did I get that? The United States Supreme Court. Justice Scalia used it in an opinion not so long ago, referring to another United States Supreme Court judge. So I think it's an appropriate phrase to use in a legal debate. All right.
Let it be noted that Professor Cotter has just cited Justice Scalia with it.
For the first and only time in my life. Policemen over your shoulder, of course not. There are 85 countries in the world that don't have the death penalty. They don't have policemen over their shoulders. Okay, that goes. Terrorists. All right, we don't want them alive because they're going to retaliate. For God's sakes, they retaliate whether you kill them or not. They retaliate whether you kill them or not. We just had a building blown up in Oklahoma, apparently because we killed some people down in Waco, not to get anybody out. Besides, the last murderer on earth that's deterred by the death penalty is a terrorist. The last person on earth that's deterred by the death penalty is a terrorist. He wants to die. That's how he becomes a hero. Hell, in Ireland, they didn't have the death penalty, so the IRA guys went on hunger strike so they could die for the cause. They killed themselves. In Israel, they blow themselves up. A guy who's willing to blow himself up, you're going to deter with the death penalty? That's the same logic that puts homosexuals in prison with men for 5 years. I mean, it's crazy. You're just not going to do it. You give them what they want. I just don't think that you've addressed the fact that it's unnecessary. We don't have to do it, and there is a hypocrisy that must occur if we try and justify it, because we have to ignore reality. We have to ignore what we say we're doing, which is respecting life. We have to send the message that was made by Scott. We have to send the message that we're killing people because we have a reason. And that's what you should do, people. If you got a good enough reason, kill them. Because we do. Your only mistake was you did it on your own. You should have stuck with us. If you stay with us and only kill the people that we as a group decide we have a good reason to kill, then you're a politician. But if you do it on your own, you're a murderer. And that's what it's about, and that's why it's hypocrisy. And yes, it's intellectually dishonest.
Matt.
Well, history of man is full of murder. It's interesting to note that Duncan McKenzie is frantically trying to preserve his own life at the last moment, filing appeals. And I wonder if anybody would think that he would be filing these appeals just with a life sentence. Would he be filing these appeals and going through the court procedure trying to get his life sentence revoked so that he could get back on the streets and live a normal life? I don't know. But consistently I've heard the fact that the death penalty costs more because people fight it harder. So I would say right there, there's a certain logic that, these people do not want to die. They do not want to suffer the death penalty. I've also heard it said that innocent people may be convicted and that the death penalty may involve racism. Well, I'll lay that to you as law students in this fine building here and the faculty. And I wonder.
It's all right, I'm only visiting.
I wonder when somebody says bad attorneys and good attorneys and bad judges and good judges, maybe what we should be talking about tonight is just how well the profession polices itself and how well it administrates itself and serves the public that it's supposed to. Finally, you that go out of here as attorneys and become judges someday, I'd say that you cannot salve your conscience for doing a bad job by eliminating the death penalty. If you think somehow that you can get off the hook of the ultimacy of life and death and what happens to real people, and the way that you do your job by just pushing the death penalty to one side and say, well, that guy might have been guilty or maybe he wasn't, but they found him guilty and that's the way it goes. That's his life. And for some people, life behind bars for an eternity, he might just as well be dead. So it's a mixed bag. But ultimately, in the history of mankind, you take a look at the heinous crimes that have been committed, the war crimes in Germany, the war crimes the Japanese committed, they were met with a hangman's rope. And the Israelis today are still hunting people down around the world. And of course, one of the big problems that they've got with that is the fact that their witnesses are not very good, they're old, they're misjudging the identities of people now. But Israel made a point of telling the world that they would not let themselves be molested and kicked around and tortured without retribution. And while we talk about intellectual honesty about things, there is a part of the human being that craves justice and demands revenge. And the individual citizens out there who are wronged and feel the desire for revenge, yeah, it may not be intellectually what we would like it to be by the books, but when those people feel that they are not getting justice, they will demand a form of justice.
Scott?
Yes, I'd just like to say two things. African Americans are about 12% of the U.S. prison population, yet out of 3,859 people executed since 1930, more than 50% of them have been black. Now, to say that racism is not core to this is to ignore the history of the slave code that allowed a separate form of justice for black people who were brought to this country as property, that has persevered through 200 years of nationhood. To this day, you will still find disproportionate numbers of black people who commit crimes against white people being sentenced to the death penalty, while similar crimes being committed by white people against black people get life in prison. As long as this type of penalty cannot be administered fairly, it shouldn't be administered at all. I'm not arguing that it should be administered at all, but I would argue that there has not been any significant inroads made to being able to apply this in a way that is fair and blind to race and class. That the majority of people who are sentenced to death, who receive capital punishment, are the people who can't afford good defense, who are given, in many cases, public defenders right out of law school to be their representatives going up against the state. Now imagine you in such a position in another couple of years where you're being asked to go against the resources of a state on whatever the courts are going to allow you as a PD. That happens time and time again. So there's a lot to be said about racial double justice. ACLU has a very good 18-minute videotape that I'll try to get a copy to the law school if folks want to take a look at that to see it in more detail. The second point I want to make in rebuttal, and I hope we get to the race issue in some more detail later in the evening, it gets to the good judge's assessment of the riot at Deer Lodge at Montana State Prison. To blame the riot solely on the murderers on death row overlooks what the National Institute of Corrections experts have found as root causes for the riot. It overlooks other conditions which are being litigated and discussed both in mostly in the civil suits that are now going forward. And I recognize that there's a lot of good people that work in corrections, and I'm not painting a negative picture of them either. I'm just saying that there's a number of contributing factors, and I would say a large contributing factor is the lack of resources, the lack of adequate supervision within that facility during that time. We had complaints leading up to the riot talking about problems with how things were going within Max and in death row. So to simply say because you've got murderers behind bars, they're going to kill each other, misses the point. There are 20,000 murders in the U.S. nationally. Of those, 100 to 150 go to death row. Now, the question seems to be begged, of those 19,850, how many of them should be executed? In any consideration of that, I think you have to look, and it gets to what Matt is talking about in terms of the costs associated with the eventuality of somebody wrongly being executed. Since the turn of the century, there's 350, 380 people who have been wrongly executed for a crime they did not commit. Society has to take a careful look at that and decide how many wrongful executions are acceptable. What margin of error are people willing to live with? I don't think the state should elevate itself to the position of ever wrongly taking the life of a citizen.
I think this is my time now to ask some questions, and I assume that they asked me as the dean to do this because it's my job to be conciliate, to bring people together, and I want to see if we can't get this panel all to agree on something. So I'm going to start, and I'll just work my way down the line and see if I can't get people to agree. Ed, and I'm dispensing with titles, because if I didn't, then I'd have to talk to Professor Cotter about calling people stupid, because we talked to him about that. But he's not Professor Cotter tonight, he's just Pat. And Judge, you're just Ed tonight. So that makes us all equal, and I'm just Rod. Now, what about, do we have death without parole in Montana?
Life without parole?
Life without parole. Well, it's life
Yes.
No.
Yes or no?
No, you do not.
We do not.
You have a sentence of life without a parole, but the person is eligible for parole after 17 and a half years.
Not after this legislature.
No, they changed the law.
They
Okay.
changed the last time, but up till this last
Yeah.
legislature you did.
And so now, it is the kind of life without parole that you advocate, right, Pat?
Yeah, as I understand it, yeah, I believe that that is a viable option. True life without parole, which is what we have in the federal system and have had for several years.
Okay. And in the federal system, when they say life without parole, there's never any chance that you'll be removed from incarceration.
No, there is one, and it's an important one for those of us who put people there. If we find out we were wrong,
Okay.
if we find out you were innocent, that's another advantage of my suggestion. I can live with the fact that there are people who will never get out of jail because I put them there and they will die there. I can live with that, but I couldn't live with the fact that they died because I made a mistake.
All right. So now, we have, presumably, thanks to this last legislature, it's something that Professor Cotter is grateful for, we have a sufficiently stringent rule, death without parole. Now, life without life. I'm sorry, life without parole.
We got to
So
change
these
the
are all
focus
new
here,
terms
Judge.
to me.
It's got to be life.
The First Amendment's very easy for me. There are only 16 words in the portion that I end up dealing with. That makes it manageable, but it's a lifetime. Now that we have that, isn't that enough? Ed?
No, in my opinion, I believe you need the death penalty as the ultimate.
Why do we need the death penalty if we're assured? It seems to me one of the major reasons is to make sure that they don't kill again. And I won't get into the predictability thing. I just suspect, just incidentally as an aside, that Professor Cotter, if he had the choice between 3 or 4 people that he would live with for the next week, and he knew certain things about certain people and knew what they had done in the past, it might taint his judgment just a tad. But enough for predictability. On this subject, then, why then? I mean, they're not going to kill again. They're put away. They're isolated. Why?
Because I believe that when a person commits certain heinous acts, that ultimate penalty ought to be available to the state or to the federal government for the penalty. That when you commit certain acts that are so heinous, that ultimate penalty ought to be available to the people.
Okay, so for the sake of
And
retribution.
For the sake of retribution, I don't believe it's a question of cost efficiency. I think that to house a person for the rest of their natural life probably equates to the cost of the appeal process and the of the various post-conviction relief processes that are incurred when a person exercises all those options. So I don't think it's a question of really being cost effective. If the system gets streamlined like the federal government says it is attempting to do, where you raise all of your appeals on the first federal appeal, you're not going to come back later, and they streamline some of those methods, then it may be cost efficient to exercise the death penalty. But I've never heard the proponents use cost effectiveness as a basis for the death penalty.
Well, I'm going to do that tonight with Pat for a moment. What if, as a quid pro quo on this, you agree, you'd said that there could be cost savings, and let us assume we could make substantial cost savings based on this. But Ed is very committed to continuing, for the sake of retribution, to have the death penalty. But in order to get that death penalty, he agrees that he will take that money and allocate it to ends that will save more than one life. That we'll send it to another country where there are people who are starving, who are hungry, who will save multiple lives then. Will you buy that? He's just saved more lives than the one. He gets his retribution, you get more lives saved. Will you accept that? I'm still trying to get us together.
Yeah. Good luck, Rod. No, of course not. And the reason is simple. I don't believe in killing people for money. Whether it's money you put in my pocket or whether it's money that you put to some worthy cause. I don't believe that a good reason to kill somebody is money. It's this, and also this highlights the hypocrisy. If we were to do that, it would be the ultimate hypocrisy. We kill you because you stuck up the gas station for money. Now you're bad. You're convicted of murder. That's a very bad thing you did. You killed somebody for money. Now we're going to kill you for money. Now what we're going to do with our money is much better than what you were going to do with your money. And that's why it's legal. That's why this is moral now, because we're going to in fact send it off to some wonderfully deserving person. You don't kill people for money. It's not complicated as far as I see it. You don't do it. If you don't want people to do it in your society, society shouldn't do it.
But if you use money and invest an enormous amount for this purpose, and there is a limited amount of that, and that is not going to save other lives, you're washing your hands of the saving of those other lives. Doesn't necessarily. This is a chance for you to save more lives. So it really doesn't come down in the equation to saving more lives. It's just that you would give up more lives to avoid being hypocritical. Right.
No, I won't value human lives. I won't trade your life for a life that I value more highly. Because that, again, is something murderers do. And we as a society say that's bad. I kill you because I think you're a member of a social or racial group. That's bad. You're threatening my way of life. So I'm going to kill you because I'm doing it to defend my people. I'm doing it to defend fill in the blank ethnic group, revolutionary group, whatever that I defend. I'm the defender of the downtrodden. And so I'm going to kill you, Mr. British soldier, because I'm not a murderer, you see, because I'm trading your life for the lives of the unborn children of Ireland, right? That's the cry of murderers since time began. It's wrong because what you're doing is you're selling one life for another, you devalue one life, and I refuse to play that game because it's the height of immorality. You don't trade lives.
I'll let Scott come in. I'm just saying, for the sake of hypocrisy, in this world where you make balances and where that kind of choice is made, you're not willing to make that choice. Okay.
Yep.
I was just trying to bring you together to save a few lives.
I
Okay,
admire that. I admire that.
And as a peacemaker, I admire your attempts here as well, but
But I'm gonna do something with you too, because
I'm sure you will. I think you've been wanting to for some time since our debate on the First Amendment during the legislature. So I look forward to this. But I would just like to say that what I have seen statistically about the death penalty compared to life in prison, in New York, statistics were, when they were debating in the early 80s about reinstituting it, they figured it was at least twice as expensive to try somebody for a capital crime and deal with the appeals as it is to sentence them to life. And in Florida, which has one of the largest death rows in the nation, they calculate that it's 6 times as expensive. So I do think that there is a cost factor that can, to just say, well, I think it might wash out. Statistics don't bear that out. They come down heavily on the side that it's an enormous expenditure of resources. We do have to look at resources
And
in
you've
terms of...
worked hard as an association to make it so.
Well, and part of the reason is because people need to be treated fairly. And as long as they're not being treated fairly because they're either poor or a minority, there is a reason to make sure that you are executing the right person. And even with our organization's commitment to those issues for the last 75 years, 350 people have been wrongly executed.
But it's not just treated fairly. It's not just because unless you define fairly as equaling, as Pat does,
Well,
just not killing someone. It's unfair for the state to ever kill someone. So it doesn't, aside from the race or any other issues. I mean, here, even if the person had committed repeated murders of the most heinous nature, you would still defend their right, and you would still go through the process.
and I have spent enough time in jails and prisons visiting that I know that one of the, to me, the worst thing is, as a freedom lover, is the denial of that freedom and liberty. And to me, hell on earth is spending the rest of your life behind bars. And that makes that person think on a daily basis what it is they're doing and what they're paying for. In terms of paying, though, I think we have to just put this in a perspective that as a nation, we're on the precipice of a runaway train on a criminal justice system that's going to get more attention than our university system at the turn of the century if we're not careful. And we've got to reassess our whole attitude towards crime and punishment in a much broader picture than just saying vengeance and retribution. I think that's part of the problem. And I recognize that the legislature was hell-bent this time to make sure that we increased the sentencing, that the House Bill 157 went just bonkers in terms of its original intent to sentencing people for sex crimes to life, from what was 2 to 20 is now 2 to 100. And I would guess that many judges will aim towards the 100 as opposed to the 2 when they're sentencing. And people will be spending all of that time, and I realize I'm getting away from the death penalty, but I think we have to put it in that perspective that the death penalty is a portion of the equation. And the only time I heard it mentioned during the legislature, and it was a serious statement by a state senator saying, we can reduce prison overcrowding. I've got a solution. Let's expand the death penalty. And I want to see who's going to be the judge of what that expansion becomes.
But I mean, the same group went with life without parole. Did you support life without parole? I just want to see if you and Pat are in agreement on that.
We did not oppose the Truth in Sentencing bill.
And so you would concede that there are times when life without parole is the right.
There are some
resolution.
people that should never get back into society. I don't argue with that. But there are some people who have done some pretty heinous things as a result of a whole bunch of factors. Drugs, alcohol, abuse, lots of reasons, who are not the same people when they're 50 as they were when they were 19. And that has to be considered.
Well, it's a little unclear. Then it does sound to me like at some point in time you would consider parole. So you don't really favor life without parole.
I'm not changing what I just said. I'm saying that some people can be reformed, and that's a reason to keep that in mind, that taking an action on somebody of what they do as a 19-year-old is eliminating any chance for them to change. The guys who are answering the 800 numbers on tourism in Montana, some of them are convicted of murder. They're in a trailer at Deer Lodge saying, please come to Montana. And and they're the ones that got the call when we said we didn't want gays and lesbians in this state. You got to register. They're the ones that took the first calls. So some of those people they're not going to be your neighbor. They're probably going to spend the rest of their lives there, but they're doing something with their life that has some value to you and me and to the state.
We won't pursue that one too much. I want to, again, if I'm not having much success at bringing this group together, I'm going to try with Matt. Matt, you seem to take largely a position that, and I think the more as an academic that I look at things, I wonder if there isn't some real sense to what you're saying, which is that the people as a whole, the democratic process, that there is a certain common sense, it was interesting, Scott also talked about supporting the democratic process in his remarks too, so you're really saying that people should be able to choose. I think that's at the heart of what you're saying, whether you have the death penalty or not.
Listening to the debate tonight, it's almost like being in a theology discussion, because we're talking about the goodness, if you will, of the state being able to take a person's life. And the reality of politics and the reality of our form of government is such that the law, which you practice and you teach and you work in, the law is determined by the people. The law is not created by necessarily attorneys and judges and people who would like to have things the way they think they ought to be. The legislative process is such that people elect their representatives to go solve a problem that they perceive, self-government. And as, for example, the people in my constituency read about the man who worked at the Swan River camp. He's already a murderer once. He almost murders the woman up there, just barely misses, is put in jail, and is waiting to go back. And he murders a man who's in there for DUI. Now, the people on the street are going to say, what kind of a goofy system is this? Why aren't you guys doing something? That's what we sent you to Helena to do, is take care of people like this. And consequently, then, the law that is created, the law that you as graduate lawyers will be working in, is a law made by the people. It's not perfect. It'll never be perfect because it's made by man. So that's what you're going to have to contend with. And at some point, if the people perceive that the criminal justice system costs too much or is wildly out of whack, they may institute prescribed penalties. You were talking about the 20,000 murderers in the country and only 190 or so many that are slated for execution. Hey, they might just put it right in the code.
Let me just ask you one to sort of separate you from Pat even further. You as a legislator, if you knew you could make a trade with another legislator, and you could give them something like the death penalty, in an exchange you could end up saving many, many lives, you'd be inclined to do that, wouldn't you? You'd say, oh, no, I'm sort of undecided on this issue anyway, and I'm going to, or even if I'm decided, I'm going to give that one because the bottom line for me is life, and I can save more lives by cutting this deal. You do that.
That depends on the lives in hand, because ultimately,
Make them the lives of your constituents.
there you go.
The ones that voted for it.
The registered voters.
The fact is, in the representative form of government, it is a selfish process. The people do look after themselves, and they expect their representatives to look after themselves and produce a system that will protect them.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that one because I thought that would be the position you'd taken. So I think there's some sense to it. It may be somewhat hypocritical, but it also saves some lives. Now, the other side of the other question, now we have, thanks to your legislature, life without parole. Why not just put the teeth into life without parole? And if the people agree to put the teeth into life without parole, isn't that enough? And you'll relent on your position. I couldn't get Ed to do that, but I hope I can get you two, Matt, that you'll give up in exchange for making sure these people will never kill again. And the people, and you go out and try and persuade, you believe that, you persuade the voters, and the voters vote for that, so you'd change your view on the death penalty then, wouldn't you?
It's possible. One of the primary things that you look at, and that I perceive on this, is the people don't necessarily, other than those who are aggrieved by a direct conflict, who have lost a loved one, don't necessarily demand revenge for each specific incident. That's why there are so many people who have committed murder and who are not up for execution. However, the populace, I think,
May make a difference based on their race, as Scott points out.
The populace does want to be protected. They want these people off the streets. They don't want to spend.
And you've done that. You've done it all for them. You've done a great job for them. You've got them off the street.
And that may very well be an acceptable political solution to the problem.
Very good. Thank you. I have to stop with people when I have any kind of agreement. Now I have to work a little bit on Scott. And then it's going to be everybody else's turn, so don't worry. Scott, would you, following hypothetical, forgive me, again, this is not my area, so it's probably not a real good hypothetical, but I just want to try the extent of your principle. As I heard it, really clearly stated, it is the same moral principle, essentially, that Pat advocates, which is to kill another, for killing someone is only taints us and is wrong in and of itself in all cases. I think, in fact, that was your language. There's no case. Nuremberg trials, something like unto that. Series of terrible war crimes that are done over a period of time, of the most heinous nature, done in a politically calculated way, with a series of political tracts and all the rest, to cause the Fuhrer, to kill millions of lives. No death penalty still. For the people who perpetrated it, who sought to do it.
To me, it doesn't serve the purpose. What it does is it brings out vengeance, it brings out retaliation, it brings out the basis of our instincts as human beings. And I don't think I think it makes us unworthy of what I equate humanity and humane behavior to be.
Okay. That's what I thought you'd say. Then, I know your commitment to the First Amendment as well. So we put this person and isolate them, and they continue to write and circulate tracts which continue to inflame that same kind of activity, and lives in enormous numbers continue to be taken. You got to get a little bit off in the first minute. You permit the track? You support the track? It's just words.
It's one of the things that separates us from Germany. Is that we counter hate speech with more speech as opposed to prohibit hate speech.
Okay. So I just wanted to be clear, even though the tracks again clearly are playing on the worst in people and encouraging them and putting the imprimatur, and it even says, these people will not kill you, they will not kill me, there is no price to pay, kill the blank. And they do it in great numbers, and they go off and they write more tracts.
Well, if you can prove that the language was the cause of the action, then I think you could.
Well, you have to say, I already know your definition of causation.
No.
It has to be perfect cause, there has to be a perfect relationship.
Understand
It's the same kind
that
of
you will-
predictability that Pat talked about tonight that never happens. So you don't have to worry about that.
Understand, you may well have your opportunity to see your hypothesis play out. In the clamor, political clamor right now to to expand the powers of the FBI and to go after increased counterterrorism activity, and for the president to stand up and start making speeches about improper speech, I think we could watch our society. We could be on the brink of what I would see as a major decline as a culture, as a civilization, and we could very easily slip into a Roman-like atmosphere where if the majority of the thumbs are up, let's have Adam, and let's have Adam in a public forum. Let's broadcast it. Let's play to the most base appeal of our citizenry. What troubles me the most in the aftermath of this bombing in the last week, and the president and the attorney general, who heretofore had never supported the death penalty, coming out and saying, we will seek swift justice and we will execute whoever is responsible for this, is to now hear kids of all generations. I've talked with parents who have 9-year-olds and 14-year-olds, and I talked with my 23-year-old this evening. And what scares me is that those young people are all saying, I want to see somebody die for this. Now that may well become a majority, it may well be a majoritarian opinion right now. Rights are not subject to majority rule, and I think that's what we're going to end up fighting, and gratefully there's a separation between the powers so that there will not be a runaway train because of legislation on this front.
One last question, Scott. How do you feel about a person's right to take their own life? Is that a right that should be sustained?
I've been talking tonight about the state's right to take
Right.
someone's life.
Oh,
And I
okay.
think I think we're talking about a different argument.
Well, I was going to try and get to that one, but I just wanted to test that premise first.
I see instances where if people want to end their lives, they could.
But one that you
Doesn't
might,
mean
you
I
might
would
therefore
agree with it, but I
right,
would-
right, and I won't. So you might, when
Maybe we should make
you
suicide
might, you
a
might give
capital crime.
you might give you might. That's what I'm getting for. If you Gary Gilmore in Utah wanted the state to take his life. And you are making the distinction that I thought you'd make, which is, if he does it himself, that's distinguishable from if he induces the state to do it, because then we are all tainted with it.
I think that's fair.
I just want to say, in conclusion, I didn't manage to get them together, but I am impressed with Scott and Pat's commitment to principle, and I'm impressed by Ed and Matt's commitment to prudence. And I remain neutral. Now, you. Okay. You'll be second. Promise.
A question for, I guess, Matt, the legislator. As luck would have it, I've known a lot of legislators, talked to a lot of legislators in my life, and most of the ones I've talked to very long will draw a distinction sometimes between what they think is right and what they know the constituents want. And sometimes they can pull in opposite directions, but they're both important in some sense. And so sometimes they have to vote for something on their conscience, even though the constituents might think it's wrong, and vice versa.
And that is the tempering factor of having a Republican form of government as compared to a pure democracy.
Right.
And one of the subjects that our forefathers talked about, letting the rabble rule, so to speak. And hopefully, during an election, people of conscience and commitment will be elected to represent their constituency. And yeah, we do individually have our own set of ethics. We bring our own morals with us. And every legislature, and on quite a few issues, you're called upon to look at what your constituents constituency thinks that you should do, what you told them you would do, and how you personally feel about the matter at hand. And this is one of the ethics, I think, in regards to running for election, is if you're truly honest with the constituency about how you feel about things and present your character and your persona the way that you really are, then they will not be disgusted with the things that you do when you go up there, when you vote your conscience. And
Well, what I heard you saying tonight, what I heard you say is that a lot of times, if you look at what the constituents, they might want the death penalty. You sit down and look at it, you look at statistics or whatever, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, my question is going to be, what don't you feel that's relevant if you sit down and vote on
what
this?
will happen over a period of time, and what I'm talking about is that if the public truly wants the death penalty, if the public is really having trouble with an issue, in a series of elections, they will clean out their representatives to get the kind of representation that they think that they want or need until they get that legislation that they're after. That's a continuing process that goes on with each election cycle. And yeah, I might not vote exactly the way that they want me to this time, and if I don't, boom, I'm out. And next time they'll pick somebody, yeah, he's pro-death penalty, or he's anti-death penalty, or whatever the issue may be. Of course, there's a lot of issues, and voters are not necessarily one-issue voters. Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Could I comment on that? I think it's important to remind ourselves that being a representative means more than following. Sometimes it means leading, sometimes it even means educating. If you think it's wrong, it's not enough to say, well, I can't tell them the truth, because they have all these falsehoods in their mind. For instance, you mentioned one. As people see the violent crime rate climbing. Well, the fact of the matter is the violent crime rate is not climbing. There are fewer murders per capita now than there were 100 years ago in this country, and the violent crime rate over the last 5 years has dropped significantly from the 70s, the last time we had the death penalty, by the way. Point being, as a representative, I understand the pressures on you. They must be intense. But you also have a responsibility to inform your constituents. I understand what you're feeling, but maybe some of what you're feeling is based on misperception. Let's talk about it. Let me explain to you why I think there are legitimate questions here. Maybe you can bring them around. You don't have to just respond or be voted out.
Certainly, and that's typically what you have to do with the people that are against you in the first place.
Sure, sure.
The fact of it is, though, is that misconceptions in the public, as a legislator or an educator, whoever you are, whatever role that you're in, you can try to educate these people. However, I'll tell you right now that when the media repeats a mistruth day after day after day and pounds the message home to the public, you're spitting into the wind.
Okay, next.
Well, I'd like to say to Judge McLean that you cut my comments very shortly, since you used some of the arguments that I was going to use in favor of the death penalty. But the gentleman sitting next to you, Pat, I believe you called.
Pat.
You're Professor Law?
No titles tonight. No, look, I do want one thing to be very clear. And we're not, nor are we ashamed of Pat, but I want one thing to be very clear, because sometimes in Montana and elsewhere, this is not understood. Our purpose here tonight, and the purpose of the sponsoring organizations, is to have an open, lively dialogue, believing much of what Scott had said earlier, that lively kind of dialogue that informs is important. Part of the agreement in that sense was we lay all status aside and we talk just as much as possible as equal. So I'm going to put aside the professor. He's, tonight, as I'm putting aside the dean, we're all just here as individuals wrestling together with a very significant issue. Now, have that.
I've heard some statistics here tonight from two sources in the ACLU.
Not in the ACLU.
Oh, I'm sorry, one source from the ACLU. I'm reminded of the old saying that there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. But in this case, there's a very important statistic which has been left out of this equation. How many prison guards have been killed by men doing life in prison? How many over the past, since
locked up where they can't hurt people.
Now,
We don't
you
disagree,
mentioned the term life without parole.
Yes, sir.
Do you honestly think there is such a thing?
Yes, sir, I do. I know it.
How do you know it?
Sir, I have put people in jail for life without parole. I know the, look, let me
But you're
explain,
not
let me,
sure they're gonna stay there. I know.
well, they might break out. I mean, yeah, that could happen.
There is a sentence called life without parole.
Yeah.
But what happens when they get a commutation? And a perfect example of that is underway right now. Jonathan Pollard, you familiar with the name?
I am familiar with Jonathan.
He's doing life without parole for giving away probably more secrets than anybody except Elbridge Ames or whatever the name is. And there's a movement underfoot right now by a foreign government to get him pardoned and released. And there's $60,000 a year being placed by a foreign power in a Swiss bank for his behalf. And he's going to get out. Mark my word, he's going to get out. Leopold and Loeb, you ever hear that case?
Oh, yes, sir.
All right.
I can quote
Will you
it.
tell them what happened? Will you tell them what happened to these two prisoners?
One was killed in a prison
That's
riot.
right.
Do you know what happened to Mr. Loeb?
The other one got out because of Eleanor Roosevelt. She
No,
went to the
sir,
went to the
sir, you asked me
government.
a question, let me answer it first. You asked me what happened to him. Yeah, I know too. And the reason he got out, sir, was that he did about 35 years. And he became, for all intents and purposes, a rather advanced medical researcher who invented a cure for a disease that was killing thousands of people in this world. And at the advanced age of, in his late 70s, he was released. Now, which I think, I'm very glad you brought it up. Because,
None of those things he did
yeah,
brought to life the 11-year-old boy that he tortured and killed, he and his buddy, and they were sons of multimillionaires. They were represented by Clarence Darrow, and Darrow maneuvered it before a judge whom he knew was opposed to the death penalty, but the judge specified he was never to get out. But he got out because of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Sir,
And he had another one. Let me, I'm
okay,
asking.
sure, go ahead.
Now, there was another one following that. A fellow named, you're all familiar with the National Review and James Buckley, the arch conservative, and also Norman Mailer, the author.
Yes.
A fellow doing life in prison in New York for murder.
Jack Adams.
He wrote a book.
Belly of the beast.
And so it so impressed Buckley, and it so impressed Mailer that they got him out of prison. He was only out of prison 3 months when he murdered a busboy with a knife in the restaurant where he worked.
That's right.
All right.
He wasn't doing life without parole, though, sir.
I'm not going to take up the floor here very long, but I want to say this. There are hundreds of thousands of police officers in this country. They all carry firearms. Now, if they take out that firearm, they do so for a purpose. Usually, the sight of it will dissuade some people from carrying out whatever criminal act they're in. But in a large number of cases, it doesn't. So they have to shoot. And they're trained to shoot to kill, not to wound, shoot to kill. If any of my agents who work for me ever come in and said, oh, I shot him in the leg, I got to say, you better go back on the range because you missed. Now, aren't they executing the man?
No, sir, they're not.
They're legally killing him, aren't they?
Well,
And they're taking him off the streets, and he
well,
won't do
that's
it
not
again.
why they're allowed to
Pat,
shoot him,
Pat,
sir.
I'm going to help out here. I'm going to help out here.
Thanks.
I'm declaring each of you, your commitment to your positions is equally vehement. Okay, so now you're equal. Now, go ahead and finish your question. And Pat's not going to say anything, but when he starts to respond, then he's free to respond.
Okay.
And he's good at taking notes. He spent a lifetime preparing.
I think there's no differentiation made here, and it should be made, and that's between guys who commit crimes of passion. Now, I don't think the death penalty is warranted in crimes of passion. And I think almost anybody would agree with me on that. But I don't think that thing down there in Oklahoma City was a crime of passion. And I think those men, if they're arrested and convicted, they should be sentenced to death. But it should be swift and sure. But it isn't going to be swift when the American Civil Liberties Union comes along and files appeal after appeal after appeal. In one case, 37 appeals. Then the man prison in Alabama, when I worked in that area, the average guy did 7 years. 7 years for a life in prison.
Well, first of all, I agree with you on several points. I agree with you that life without parole should be life without parole. I've worked years to put people away for murder, and I would not have been happy had the sentence been life without parole, but you're out in 7 years. I would not have been pleased by that. That was less than the number of people they killed.
Just as an aside, Pat, none of the people that you prosecuted successfully under life without parole are now out.
No, and they never will be. Where we agree, sir, and I think it's an important agreement, is that life without parole should mean life without parole. To the extent that you've pointed out that there have been life sentences that weren't life sentences, I agree with you completely. There's nothing more frustrating for a prosecutor than to sit there and get this wonderful sounding sentence and know that the son of a gun is going to be back on the street by summer. Okay, so we agree on that. We obviously have a couple points where we differ, to put it mildly. But I think I understand where you're coming from. I think you speak for a lot of people in your feeling. The only thing a couple points I would make. One, I believe, because I've seen it, that we can construct life without parole that means exactly that. Second, you make what I believe, and I am absolutely positive, is a very sincere point that, you know, nothing that Mr. Loeb could ever do could undo the evil he did. You're absolutely right. However, nothing we can do as a society or as individuals will ever undo the evil he did. Bobby Franks is still dead. Whether we strap Loeb onto a gurney and jam poison in his vein, or whether we electrocute him until his insides fry, Bobby Frank is still dead. And I will quote to you, sir, or a paraphrase, because I can't remember the exact quote, from Clarence Darrow, the lawyer who defended Loeb. And he said, "The crowd cries, 'Give him what they gave little Bobby Frank.'" And Darrow said, "If the day has come when my society, my community, my neighbors have not more respect for life than Leopold and Loeb, then I have lived too long. We must be better than the murderers, sir. We cannot give them what they gave, because when we do that, we reduce ourselves to their level."
I didn't suggest that.
Well, good, then we agree.
Let's, thanks. Next, yes.
I was going to say,
We'll come back.
just give you another general comment with after the Oklahoma bombing. I think it's kind of a sad day when the day that they catch one of who may have been one of the bombers, that we have the President of the United States and the Attorney General saying that they should go for death without even having all the facts. I do hope, and my friends who know me will be surprised here, I hope the ACLU helps him out, because he's going to need a hell of a lot of help. Just the turn we've had in the last week, the passion that people have. We talk about having the FBI infiltrate groups, the militia of Montana, or any other militia. It's that infiltration that we had 50 years ago in Germany, and I think we have a lot better ways we can go about that. Let's fight this with words, the way we're doing it tonight, not with infiltration. ACLU, you have your work cut out for you.
I know.
I think that was more of an advertisement.
Rhetorical.
But accepted gracefully.
Thank you.
Basically, law is designed so that people have a system of justice to go to, so that they don't take the law into their own hands and have a vigilante society. And yet, when you put people in prison with life without parole, and they have nothing left to lose, as the judge mentioned, you get vigilante justice in prison from those very people. What do you say to that argument? I mean, I'm talking to Pat and Scott as far as that goes. And one other question would be, would you say that as a society that we should ever go to war, given your views?
Oh, I believe in self-defense. I believe in self-defense, and if that is done on a national scale, I believe that as well. So yeah, sure. If we were attacked or we were in danger, absolutely. I'm no pacifist. I'm from Chicago. We don't I will tell you that when I was a public defender, the one argument that my friends who were public defenders and lifetime defense lawyers, the ones who were in favor of the death penalty, and there were not an insignificant number of defense lawyers who are in favor of the death penalty. And the way one of them put it to me, which I thought was very powerful, he said, I did not defend this guy to have him murdered in jail by some guy doing life who has nothing to lose. Okay? So that was his concern. So he too, even defense lawyers, recognized the concern about murder in prison. So it's a legitimate concern. I think that we as a society can do better to address that concern than killing people on the prediction that they might engage in that kind of activity. And I think once we begin to try and decide who lives and who dies based on predictions about what they may or may not do in prison, we cross a very dangerous threshold. Because then, why stop at prison? Why stop at prison? And I would just point out, we would all think it a terrible thing if a person were put in jail for even a day, not based on anything they had ever done, but simply on a prediction made by the government that they might do something that would deserve being put in prison for a day. And as a matter of fact, we don't even give them a trial, because you can't try them because they haven't done anything. We simply put them in prison for a day. We would all think that was a terrible thing. In Russia, we would think even that was a terrible thing. Yet, note that one of the arguments for the death penalty on this issue is we have to kill them because they might commit murder in prison. They might take this kind of vigilante justice, and that is a reason to kill them to prevent that from happening. I'm afraid I can't accept it. I think we can do better than killing people to prevent crime.
And that's a specious argument in itself. A person has to be convicted of the crime, and he has to commit a crime that the legislature has designated is punishable by the capital punishment before that option is even before the jury or the judge. So the individual is placed in a prison environment in a less than perfect system, at least in Montana, where he cannot be successfully isolated for the rest of his life. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be done, but it simply cannot be done at the Montana State Prison today. And you're not sentencing someone to death without a trial. He's been convicted of a capital crime, and you've looked at his violent history, and it's predictable that he's likely to do it again. So that's a specious argument that carries no weight.
Oh, well, let's talk about it.
No, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Scott, you're going to get next. But Scott has been waiting so patient.
Okay, sure. Sorry, Scott.
When you raised the question about vigilante justice, I was thinking you were going to be talking about citizens going out and hanging people themselves, lynching and doing that kind of stuff. So it took me a second to catch on to where you're going. We argued when J.D. Lynch brought forward in the Senate this last session the 2 strikes, what ended up being 2.5 strikes and you're out, saying that some people should never see the light of day, that we should not let the judges make that determination, the legislature will make that determination, and regardless of their behavior or their conduct in prison, they will be imprisoned for life, even if they commit a hormonal crime at 19 and their seminal juices are dried up by 60, we're going to be caretaking them till their natural death. The same argument of the vigilante justice, of whether or not these guys having nothing to lose would make more problems for their being apprehended in the first place, whether there would be more violence in the police enforcement where a guy knows that, hey, I'm never going to see the light of day, I might as well shoot it out and try to get out of this scenario. Whether that would further endanger law enforcement, whether it would further endanger members of the community, whether they would have no reason to cooperate once they're in prison, are all things we have to think about. That is law now for half a dozen violent crimes in Montana, and we will figure out somewhere down the line exactly whether or not the prediction of that costing us $5 to $7 million additional correction costs every decade is a conservative estimate or not. But I think what we see is that some people, you have to be very careful on labeling never out, never rehabilitated, life without parole. I'm saying it is a justified sentence on occasion, but to mandate it across the board without individually looking at it, I think is playing into this whole notion of why we as a society have gone from 300,000 inmates in our prison system in 1980 to over 1 million in 1994. No nation on earth puts more people behind bars than the land of the free. And to me, that is a fundamental contradiction. And instead of following what corrections officials in Western Europe are doing, where they're giving people stiff sentences, certain sentences, but short sentences with a real focus to try to get them to become productive members of society again, we're going off on a whole other thing. Lock them up for as long as we possibly can, give them as little treatment as possible, and then, they get out and they reoffend. How surprising.
Scott, may I get just, and then I'm going to give the time back to Pat, but just to pursue your point for a minute. Pat had previously indicated that over the last decade there's been a drop in violent crime. Might there have been some connection between the increase in our incarceration and the drop in violent crime?
The increase in our incarceration is largely due to a draconian approach to a social problem and a health problem of drug addiction. Most of the people behind bars are there because they're drug addicts, and they're supporting their habits through violent underground economic activity.
And are much more likely, therefore, to be recidivists without that problem being cured, right? I mean, if you let them out, that's your point. So you have to deal with the problem.
You may never cure the problem, but you can address the problem with means other than incarceration. I'm not going to argue that drug habits are curable.
Pat.
Yeah, I think we're running around the tree here a little, Ed. Bottom line is, the difference between the person convicted of murder that you kill, that you order to be killed, and the person you don't, is a prediction that you make as to whether you think they will commit another murder. That's it. Now, I grant you that you don't even get to make that prediction until they've been convicted of a murder. But you're not killing them for that murder. If that were the case, you'd kill everybody who was convicted of a murder. You said yourself, even when you were saying that my argument was specious, you said yourself, first they get a nice trial, they get convicted of the underlying crime, and then I look at their record, and I make a prediction about what they may do in the future. And that is the basis upon which you either impose or do not impose the death penalty. I feel, and I'm sorry, I don't see it as specious, that you are in fact making the determination, not that they're guilty or not. I'm not saying that's why that's based on a prediction. The guilt is one issue. You're making a prediction, you're making a decision about whether to impose a death penalty based on a prediction. I think that's wrong, and I don't think my argument is specious. I think you've made it yourself.
Well, here's why I disagree with you, Pat. There are certain individuals that, like it or not, just do not have a part of a social conscience, and they will commit a heinous act, they will torture other individuals and make them suffer, and they'll have no remorse for it, and they have not learned from their actions. And their past actions give you the indication of how we finally come to this certain culmination, and we're going to continue on from there. And that there's no prospect of ever having an effect on this individual where that same type of crime will not be committed again if given the opportunity. Now, if that's called predictability, so be it. But what you're looking at is a criminal history and a total lack of moral conscience. And that individual, and you're talking again, as I say, maybe 3% of the homicides that are committed by the individuals that possess these certain characteristics. And that does, as chagrined as it might make Pat be, give you some predictability or foreseeability that someone else is likely to die at the hands of this individual. And if someone's going to die, let it be that individual, not someone else.
I don't disagree with you, Ed. I think you're absolutely right that those kind of predictions have to be made in sentencing. My only point is you don't have to kill him to achieve your goal. And if you're going to make this fine distinction, I assume anybody convicted of murder, you're going to make that kind of a decision. You want to protect society. But I guess I'm still making the point that it seems to me that the cutting edge issue between life and death for these people is and I don't doubt your intelligence, I don't doubt your experience, I don't doubt your wisdom. But nobody, Ed, nobody, not Solomon himself, can predict who's going to commit a crime in the future. You can guess, but you can't predict, and we shouldn't punish people on predictions, even when they're intelligent and well thought out and carefully considered. I'm not suggesting you do this light-handedly or you don't really care or you throw a dart at a board. But I'm just saying you can't make that prediction, Ed, because no human being on earth can make it. And we
Okay.
don't punish people for that.
Question.
One quick question to Matt, and Ed. And Matt in particular, as a representative and with a constituency that is primarily Christian, how do you reconcile, we're getting back to theology like you mentioned before, how do you reconcile the fact that Christ himself was executed by the state? It was the Roman state, but the state nonetheless. How do you reconcile that fact as a legislator, you're representing a group of Christians, to follow through on an execution?
Well, let's put it like this. If you're a Christian, you believe that he was put on the cross for a reason, and he rose again. And I'd say that any one of these murderers that is convicted and executed, if he can rise again, then he's doing pretty good for himself.
Okay. Okay, up there.
Yeah, this is for Pat.
You kind of become a professor.
Don't have to.
Tomorrow.
Well, you premised.
No, you won't.
You kind of premised your argument against the death penalty on the irrationality or wrongfulness of this judge, having to look into someone's eyes and predict what they're going to do in the future. And that was kind of an answer to the judge's thing on hurting or killing other prisoners or prison guards, right? And so your answer to that was to incarcerate them for life without parole and isolate them. Is that correct?
Yeah, preventative steps to keep them from harm. If you feel that's a danger, then take rational steps to prevent it.
Well,
Don't
basically,
punish them assuming it's going to happen.
okay, so basically the judge is going to have to look in these people's eyes and still decide whether they're a threat to the prisoners or to prison guards, and is going to have to isolate them on the basis of possible future contact.
Yeah, it's preventative. There's a difference between taking a preventative step to prevent a harm and punishing somebody. There's a huge difference between saying, I'm going to, look, whenever we put a person in prison, and one of our goals is to prevent them from doing more harm, whether it's for car theft or for murder, we're always saying, we're making some assumption about you here, Joe. We're assuming that if we leave you alone, you'll probably steal another car or do whatever you do. But there's a huge difference between taking rational, reasonable steps to prevent a danger you perceive and adding an extra punishment based on an act that hasn't occurred yet. There's a tremendous difference there. One is simply trying to prevent something from happening. The other is assuming it's already happened and treating you as though it's happened, you've been convicted, and now you're going to be punished for it, all at once.
That is an isolation, an extra punishment.
Well, prison is a punishment.
Oh, right. I mean,
and there are
but
always
you have,
conditions in prison.
right, you have life without parole, and then you have death, and then you have life without parole isolated. I mean, it's an extra punishment. You're still basing
Well,
that
no,
on
I do
future
not
action.
advocate life without parole isolated. I would advocate life without parole and let the people who understand it, if the judge wants to say, look, I think this guy's a danger, let's isolate him. That's not part of the sentence. That's a condition, just like let's keep him in this prison as opposed to another prison in the system. It's a condition. I think when the guy gets to be about 75 and he can't walk anymore, we might let him out of isolation. He's probably less of a threat to the other guys. As a matter of fact, we might be able to do it earlier. The point is not that you life without parole, in isolation, no TV, you don't get dessert. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you can take rational, and by the way, the prisons in this state and in every state and in the federal system take these kind of steps with every single prisoner that comes in. Every prisoner, whatever they're convicted of, they make that determination. How much of a threat do they pose to other prisoners? And they take rational steps. That's why you maybe go to maximum security prison as opposed to the farm, etc. That's all I'm advocating. I'm not advocating, thumb screws for the rest of his life. Yes.
Are you pointing at me? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to ask the judge, I guess I would feel as an attorney defending a criminal that if I made a mistake and I messed up the case and the person I was defending got the death penalty, I'd feel a certain amount of guilt, and I would have a hard time living with myself and that responsibility. I want to ask you how you could make a determination whether someone was going to live or die, and find out later you made a mistake and it was too late, they were already dead.
Well, there are certain safeguards built into the system in Montana. The first one is that in any homicide case, there has to be an attorney involved who has experience in defending homicide cases. No one is allowed, no matter how many years of experience they have, to come in and defend a homicide defendant on their own without having prior experience. They've got to be qualified in that particular field. As to whether we make mistakes, I think that we all have to live with our mistakes, in the course of our lives, and we pray that when you come down to a capital case, that you're not involved in the case where there has been a drastic mistake. Now, as to the death penalty phase, what I would look at as far as me making a mistake, okay? When the jury returns a conviction in a capital case, they felt that there's been a certain burden met. And throughout the trial, the judge is sitting and listening to the evidence. And you're looking for holes in the state's case, as well as any doubt you may have as to the defendant's guilt. And what I would suggest to you, if you have any doubts or you have any queries about that, you stay far away from the death penalty in case that very thing comes up in the future. If there's a possibility that this individual may come up with some new evidence, or there may be something that comes out that there's been a tragic mistake here, you don't want the death penalty weighing on your conscience. So the judge, him or herself, is looking to be convinced, to a dead certainty, not beyond a reasonable doubt, that this atrocity was in fact committed by the defendant. So you have those built-in safeguards, your own conscience, just to protect your own sanity in that. And it's a feeling that one cannot ever describe to another individual when you sentence someone to death. And believe me, you go on 1 or 2 hours sleep a night for nights on end, for weeks on end, wondering, is it right that I do this? I'm a Roman Catholic, and I know the position that my church has taken on the death penalty, and that's that it should not be imposed. And you're weighing all that, and you're praying to your God, wondering, am I doing the right thing? Help me do the right thing. And it's something that you're using your human experiences, your religious experiences, and all your doubts to try and come through with the decision that you ultimately make. I hope to never impose the death penalty again, but I do not regret the 2 times that I have imposed it.
Well, actually, what we're going to do now is to tell you a Darrow story. Clarence Darrow watched a young lawyer once. The young lawyer proceeded as follows. He was defending a person who was being tried for biting the ear off of a given individual. And the young attorney said to the prime witness for the state, the prosecution, did you see my client bite the ear off? He said, no, I didn't. And so the young lawyer stood up as tall as could and said, well then how could you come here today and testify that he did? The witness said, I did see him spit it out. Darrow said, there is always a right time to start and a right time to stop. I really appreciate, first of all that the organizations did to make this evening possible, and I think they did deserve a round of applause. they deserve a round of applause. And finally, I think you have been great as an audience. We left a little time so that people could ask individual questions. We did have some